The front door slammed harder than I expected, startling the cat from her perch on the windowsill. Samantha stood there, her arms crossed, eyes blazing with frustration. "Mom, why did you lock the credit card accounts? Jake is furious," she shouted, voice echoing through the living room. I took a slow breath and didn't move from my chair. Calmly, I asked, "Which accounts are you referring to?" Samantha. Her glare softened only slightly, but the anger in her posture didn't waver. She gestured toward the kitchen counter, as if that alone explained everything. "You know, the ones Jake has been helping manage. He's been doing so much for us, he even sorted out our bills when the car repairs came up last year. And now you've locked them all." I let her words sink in, noting the subtle way she assumed the accounts were communal, as though my decades of careful planning had no bearing. She didn't ask why I had secured my finances. She didn't consider that someone might have been exploiting my trust. Her loyalty to Jake had blinded her to the reality right in front of her. I rose slowly and met her gaze. "Samantha, you're upset because you don't know the whole story. I need to show you exactly why these measures were necessary." Her brow furrowed, and I could see the beginnings of doubt flicker behind the anger. I retrieved the paperwork from the desk, placing it carefully on the table, feeling the weight of what I had to reveal. The moment had arrived to unravel the first layer of deception and set the course for uncovering the truth. It all started a few days before Samantha's outburst. My phone had buzzed with an unusual alert while I was reviewing the monthly statements for my investments. At first, I thought it was a mistake. Chase Sapphire Reserve, American Express Platinum, Bank of America Premium. Accounts I had never opened. Balances that made my stomach drop. 28,400, 31,200, 25,400. My blood ran cold. I sat down slowly, gripping the edge of the kitchen counter, and scrolled through the transactions. Restaurants I'd never visited, electronics I'd never purchased, cash advances I had no recollection of taking. Then I noticed the mailing addresses. My heart sank further. All statements were being sent to Samantha's house. It didn't make sense. She was responsible, diligent, and had no history of mishandling money. Yet every line, every dollar, was linked to her address. And then I remembered Jake, always talking about investments and quick money schemes, always offering help with technology I never fully trusted. The realization hit me like a hammer. Someone had been taking advantage of my trust, using my personal information to build a financial trap right under my nose. And somehow, Samantha had fallen into it too, unknowingly. I moved quickly, opening my credit monitoring accounts, cross-referencing every alert, every transaction, every mailing detail. Within minutes, I had a clear picture. Months of hidden theft, orchestrated by someone close, someone who knew exactly how to exploit the family's loyalty. Determination surged through me. I would not allow this manipulation to continue, not against my finances, and not against my family. Every irregularity, every suspicious charge, every misleading explanation would be traced and confronted, and the first step would be securing the accounts before the thief had a chance to strike again. I opened my laptop and logged into each of my accounts, methodically checking balances, transaction histories, and linked cards. Every detail confirmed my suspicions. Someone had created a parallel financial world using my name. The charges didn't match my usual spending patterns, and the statements all pointed to Samantha's address. My pulse quickened, but I focused on the facts. First, I called Chase Bank and reported the account as fraudulent. Within minutes, the representative froze the account and canceled the cards. Next, I repeated the process with American Express and Bank of America. Each call, each confirmation, reinforced the reality that someone had been systematically siphoning money under the guise of help. I changed every password across every legitimate account, banking, investments, and credit monitoring, locking out anyone who might have unauthorized access. Then I called my attorney, Vincent Rodriguez, and briefed him on the situation. Document everything, I instructed. 3 fraudulent accounts, all mailed to Samantha's house. I want this on record before we move forward. As I worked, I noticed small inconsistencies in past transactions that hadn't seemed important before minor delays in Samantha reporting certain bills, casual references to Jake handling online logins, excuses about computer trouble. Now they made sense. It wasn't negligence, it was manipulation. Jake had positioned himself as the helpful husband while secretly controlling access to the accounts and shielding his own actions behind Samantha's loyalty. I paused for a moment, letting the gravity of it settle. I could feel the careful balance between family trust and betrayal, and I knew this investigation had to be thorough before confronting anyone. One misstep could make the problem worse. With accounts secured and a record of every irregularity, I was ready to uncover the truth behind Jake's manipulations and prepare for the confrontation that would come next. I watched Samantha pacing the living room, her hands twisting the hem of her scrubs. Her frustration was clear, but beneath it, I could see the subtle signs of confusion and conflict. She wasn't angry at me for no reason. She was defending Jake, and it finally clicked. She had been manipulated. Every casual remark she had made over the past months now revealed its true meaning. References to Jake helping with the bills, his advice on investments, the way she hesitated to question certain transactions, all of it had been carefully orchestrated. He had positioned himself as indispensable, the bridge between her and me, while isolating her from noticing the inconsistencies. I sat down on the sofa and waited for her to notice the seriousness in my expression. "Samantha," I began gently, "I need you to understand something. This isn't about you being careless. Someone has been using your trust and loyalty to shield their own actions." Her brow furrowed, and her pace slowed. I don't understand," she said quietly, a tremor in her voice. "I thought Jake was helping, keeping everything organized so we wouldn't miss anything." I nodded, knowing how difficult this moment would be. "I know. That's exactly what he wanted you to think. And because you trusted him, you unknowingly became part of the problem. He used your loyalty as a shield." Her shoulders slumped as realization began to seep in. I could see the internal struggle wanting to defend her husband while sensing that something wasn't right. It was a delicate balance. I had to reveal the truth without shattering her trust completely. I handed her a folder of statements and recent alerts. "Look at this carefully. Every irregularity, every account, every transaction. Notice where the patterns lead. You need to see this before we talk about next steps." She glanced at the papers, her confusion deepening as the weight of Jake's manipulations settled in. I remained calm, letting her process, knowing this was only the beginning of uncovering the full truth. With her slowly beginning to see what had been done, I prepared myself for the confrontation that would expose Jake completely in the chapters ahead. I spent the evening organizing everything I had uncovered: bank statements, credit reports, emails, and transaction histories were spread across my dining table like pieces of a puzzle. Each document told a fragment of the story, and together they painted a picture too clear to ignore. The numbers, the dates, the mailings all pointed to one source, one manipulator, and the consequences of blind trust. By the time I finished, I felt a grim sense of readiness. It wasn't enough to secure the accounts or freeze the fraudulent cards. Samantha needed to see the full scope of what had been happening, and Jake needed to be confronted with the evidence in a controlled setting. I drafted a calm, measured invitation for both of them to join me for a discussion in the house. When they arrived, I had the documents neatly arranged in the center of the table. I gestured for them to sit. Samantha hesitated at the doorway, her hands fidgeting, and Jake followed with that confident, practiced smile that usually disarmed everyone. But not tonight. Tonight, I was prepared, and the calm authority I projected set the tone before a word was even spoken. I began with a measured recounting of the past months, alerts, unusual charges, and patterns she might have overlooked. Samantha listened with a mix of apprehension and disbelief, her eyes flicking to Jake for reassurance. I could see the subtle cracks forming in the facade he relied upon, the small shifts in posture and the twitch of a hand betraying tension beneath the mask of composure. As I laid out the evidence, the room thickened with a charged silence. Every document, every line on the statements, acted as a thread unraveling the careful web he had woven. I spoke deliberately, letting the facts sink in, allowing Samantha to process her own role as an unwitting participant in his scheme. By the time I finished, Jake's confidence had begun to falter. Samantha's expression was a mix of shock and dawning clarity. I remained calm, knowing the next moments would be critical to exposing the truth fully and setting the stage for justice. With the evidence laid bare, I prepared to confront the full extent of his manipulation, ready for the revelations that would follow in the next chapter. Chapter 6. The Shock Revealed. I placed the final document on the table and met Jake's eyes directly. Every account, every transaction, every mailing address. I said steadily. Points to actions taken without my knowledge, using my personal information. You've hidden this for months. Jacob. Samantha's hands froze on the edge of the table, her eyes darting between us. I could see the first flickers of realization forming on her face. I thought he was helping, she whispered, voice barely audible. He always said he was managing the accounts to keep things organized. I never questioned it. I nodded, keeping my tone calm. Exactly. That's what he wanted. Your loyalty was a shield, Samantha. You were defending him without knowing the truth. Jake's confident smile wavered. He opened his mouth, then closed it, trying to recover composure. But the evidence on the table left no room for denial. I could see the subtle tension in his posture, the shift of weight, the tightening of his jaw, the way his hand hovered over his phone. Hesitating, Samantha's expression crumpled as guilt replaced confusion. Her voice shook as she said, I didn't know. I never meant to. You were manipulated. I interrupted gently, and that's not your fault. But now you see how your trust was used against me and even against yourself. You need to understand what has been happening so we can fix it. I turned back to Jake. You've built this deception over months, hiding transactions, forging signatures, and using Samantha's loyalty to cover your tracks. It ends now. I have records, statements, and logs that prove your actions. There is no room for excuses. He shifted uncomfortably, his usual bravado fading under the weight of the documents. The calm authority I maintained contrasted sharply with his defensiveness, and the room seemed to shrink around him. Samantha, trembling, looked at the paper, at him, and then at me, understanding finally settling in like a cold wave. I could feel the emotional climax pressing down, the truth fully revealed. The confrontation at its peak. Each of us sat in silence, absorbing the consequences of deception, knowing the next steps would determine the family's path forward. With the full extent of his manipulation exposed, I prepared for the legal and moral reckoning that would follow in the next chapter. The tension in the room had thickened to a near physical weight when Jake's composure finally cracked. He leaned forward slightly, his voice lowering, almost a whisper, but with a hardness that made it clear he was testing limits. You think you know what you're dealing with, Clarissa, he said, eyes cold. Be careful how far you push this. Not everything is as simple as it seems. I didn't flinch. I met his gaze steadily, feeling the years of experience in business and life reinforce my resolve. I've already taken the necessary steps. Jake, I said evenly, all accounts are secured. Passwords changed, and my attorney is fully aware of your actions. Any attempt to intimidate me will only reinforce the consequences you're already facing." Samantha's hands trembled slightly as she clutched the edge of her chair. I could see the dawning realization on her face. This was not the helpful husband she had defended for months. She had been an unwitting shield for someone who had manipulated her trust for his own gain. The recognition brought a quiet shame and a pang of fear. I reached for my phone and made the calls I had prepared. Law enforcement, documentation with my attorney, records of every irregular transaction. Everything was now officially recorded. Jake's subtle threats, meant to unsettle me, instead served to strengthen my case and resolve. Samantha's eyes met mine, full of both guilt and understanding. I didn't see it before. "Mom," she whispered. "I didn't know he was." Her voice faltered, but the implication was clear. She was beginning to grasp her own victimization, the ways Jake had used her as a barrier to shield his deception. Jake leaned back, mask slipping slightly, realizing his subtle intimidation had failed. The room felt different now, charged with the clarity of exposure and the inevitability of accountability. The financial, emotional, and familial stakes were higher than ever. But I had taken the necessary measures to protect myself and, ultimately, the family. With the threats documented and boundaries firmly established, the next step would be to ensure that justice moved forward in a way that could hold him accountable and prevent further harm. The next morning, I contacted the Austin Police Department and filed formal reports for identity theft and financial fraud. Detective Lisa Hernandez listened carefully as I explained the situation. Every detail of the unauthorized accounts, the mailing addresses, and the manipulations. She asked questions, took notes, and assured me that an investigation would begin immediately. Samantha sat beside me, hands clasped tightly in her lap. She had made the decision to file for divorce, her voice steady but quiet, as she recounted the months of deception she had unknowingly participated in. I could see the weight of guilt she carried, but also the determination to set things right. Together, we provided the authorities with statements, documents, and records, forming a comprehensive case against Jake. Through the paperwork and records we presented, patterns of prior manipulation and theft emerged. Previous victims had been identified, and evidence from past schemes corroborated what we had uncovered. Jake's carefully constructed facade began to crumble under the scrutiny of law enforcement, and it became clear that accountability was inevitable. I felt a sense of calm satisfaction as the legal process took hold. The frustration, fear, and betrayal that had weighed on me began to shift into purpose. For the first time in months, it felt like action was being taken not just to protect my family, but to prevent Jake from harming others in the same way. Samantha glanced at me, a mixture of relief and resolve in her eyes. She understood that this was not just about money or property. It was about reclaiming control, truth, and dignity. Together, we had laid the foundation for justice, documenting everything meticulously so there could be no question of wrongdoing. With the investigation underway, and Samantha preparing to testify fully against Jake, the first concrete steps toward resolution had been taken. I could feel the momentum building, ready to carry us through the consequences and closure that awaited in the next chapter. In the weeks after the investigation, Samantha began to see everything from a clearer perspective. She admitted her mistakes, apologized for the ways she had unknowingly defended Jake, and asked questions about how the deception had unfolded. I could see her processing the weight of the truth. And for the first time in months, she approached me with openness rather than defensiveness. We spent long conversations reviewing how trust had been broken and how it could be repaired. Samantha asked for guidance on monitoring accounts and recognizing warning signs, demonstrating a genuine willingness to learn and grow. She began to understand that loyalty, while important, must be paired with discernment and awareness. Slowly, our family rebuilt routines that honored these new boundaries. Samantha checked in regularly about finances, but no longer assumed control or responsibility over decisions that were mine alone. Communication became direct and transparent. And though the awkwardness lingered at times, the trust we had lost started to return in small but meaningful ways. The emotional scars remained. Memories of Jake's manipulation were difficult to shake, and Samantha's guilt weighed on her. Yet the progress was undeniable. Each conversation, each shared acknowledgement of mistakes, strengthened the bond between us. As trust began to be restored and boundaries became a natural part of our interactions, I noticed Samantha's confidence growing. She was learning to balance loyalty with judgment. And I was reminded that family relationships require patience, guidance, and forgiveness to heal fully. With these lessons taking root and the family slowly regaining stability, we were prepared to reflect on the larger meaning of the ordeal and the insights it had offered in the next chapter. As the weeks passed, Samantha and I spent more time discussing the lessons we had both learned from the ordeal. Vigilance, I realized, was not just about protecting finances, but about maintaining awareness in every aspect of life where trust could be exploited. Boundaries were essential, and I saw Samantha beginning to grasp the value of defining limits clearly. Even with those closest to her, we talked openly about empowerment, about how taking decisive action had not only protected me, but also helped Samantha recognize her own strength. She admitted that for too long, she had allowed loyalty to overshadow judgment, and that understanding this would help her navigate future challenges. Our conversation soon turned outward. We began sharing our experiences with friends and family, raising awareness about elder financial abuse and the subtle ways manipulation can creep into a household. Together, we discussed scenarios and warning signs, emphasizing that speaking up and documenting irregularities were not acts of mistrust, but of responsibility. I realized that real love requires protection, not blind compliance. Care for family meant being willing to confront uncomfortable truths, to act decisively when necessary, and to guide loved ones toward safety, even if it meant temporary conflict or discomfort. Samantha saw how her role could evolve from passive observer to active participant in maintaining honesty and security within the family. Looking back on the months of upheaval, I felt a quiet satisfaction. We had confronted deception, restored boundaries, and reclaimed both financial and emotional control. More importantly, we had transformed a moment of betrayal into an opportunity for growth and awareness. As we planned our next steps, continuing advocacy, mentoring others, and reinforcing lessons learned, I knew that this experience would shape our approach to trust in family for years to come. The foundation had been rebuilt, and with it, a lasting sense of clarity and resilience prepared us for whatever challenges lay ahead.